In this episode, you'll learn about the business challenges of adopting AI, real-life examples of those challenges, and strategies to overcome them. Let's accelerate your business. Welcome to the AI Accelerator for Business show, where you get the latest strategies, tactics, and information about the benefits of artificial intelligence for your business. My name is Carl Ye, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jeff Bradshaw. And today we're going to talk about the risks of implementing AI in your business.
And Carl, this matters because understanding the risks associated with AI implementation is crucial for businesses to avoid costly mistakes, ensure ethical practices are being handled, and to maintain the competitive edge in an increasingly AI-driven marketplace.
You know, like we've met like hundreds of businesses now, and I think people still get excited, obviously, about like the potential of what AI can do. But I think part of the risks is managing those expectations of what it can do versus what it can't do. And there's a lot of hype. So how do you kind of navigate through that? Because you always say in any of our discovery presentations, there's an expectation that AI can solve for those who don't use it regularly, who aren't in the space, because of how much hype there is, right? It's like, oh, AI could do this, whether it's something for business or it can do this, it wrongs humanity. But I think there's an over belief of what it can do, but yet an under belief of what it could do down the road.
We see it all the time. I mean, we walk into client meetings and you're right, that expectation is that we're going to come in and solve their most complex problems with AI. And when we talk to them about the fact that it can, help them with those repetitive, data-driven predictive tasks and solve the 10 to 40%, it's not nearly as exciting, but it absolutely has a huge impact on the bottom line with respect to cost savings and people's times and being able to use their energy in places where they should be using it.
I think one of the funniest things I've seen so far is how many legacy systems we've run across. Like, I don't even know what that system, I didn't know it existed, or it's very niche to that industry. And what's even more funny is it only does one thing, and it does that one thing terribly, but that company will use it for the next 2 decades. That's the thing, is like, how can you integrate AI into something that barely works to begin with and just is literally held on by digital duct tape?
We do. We see that with organizations that are still very, very heavy paper-based. And, I was talking about this just a couple of days ago. I mean, how can we sell them an engine when they're still using a horse and buggy? I mean, that's one of the risks you have to be aware of with AI, is that, you need to make sure that your systems are updated and somewhat digital, or at least you're in the process of transforming it into a more digital format in order for AI to be able to help you out.
So when we talk about risks, I think the number one thing that we always, that comes up, not number one, maybe a major point, is hallucinations and inaccurate outputs, right? And I still go back to what I said at the beginning, where there's an overbelief in some things and an undervalue in others. And I think sometimes there's an overbelief, it'll hallucinate all the time. And I think as the systems got better, it's decreasing its amount of hallucinations. Not that there isn't any, but I also think it's still your responsibility to ensure that whatever the final output is, that it's accurate. Just like if you're working with a junior staff member, an intern, other employees, you're still accountable, whether you're a leader, a business leader, or an individual contributor. You're still responsible for the output. I think most people understand you don't allow AI to do everything 100%, but what used to be 20% and you have to check 80, now is more 10 to 40 to 50%, but you still have to check that 50. Like, an example would be AI deep research. Amazing tool, right? Every single large language model has their own AI deep research type things. You still have to review and make sure that those facts are accurate, numbers, sites where they're pulling from are legitimate, and so on.
The funny thing with that, though, Carl, is that, and again, we've been in meetings with clients where somebody will say, well, would you get this to write your report, or would you get this to run your numbers for you? And people will be, absolutely no way, I don't trust it. And yet they hand it off to a human, and there seems to be more trust in humans. And yet, you want to talk about hallucinations. Humans hallucinate a lot too when they're doing work, and it's not always coming back 100%. And I think that's what people have to realize, is that no, AI is not perfect, but the humans doing the work for you aren't necessarily perfect as well. So you're still going to have to double check information and reports. So I think that's the thing that people miss with AI, is they think because it's computer generated and it's new that you can't trust it.
And it comes back to, I think the numbers play out for themselves on autonomous vehicles, right? So when the accident rate for, I believe, autonomous vehicles, I have to double check the research on this, is much lower than human drivers. But our expectation is that it has to be near perfect or perfect, right? Because you don't have anyone to blame when an autonomous vehicle gets into an accident. There isn't, it's that person's fault, it's that person, right? So even if a human accidents caused by humans is, let's say 5%, and then accidents caused by autonomous vehicles is the same, or say 4%, we will still think that is way too high. We probably expect it to be 1%, less than 1%. So it's an interesting thing when you mention, oh, it shouldn't hallucinate. It's like, well, the employee that you give it to could potentially have a higher rate of errors and mistakes for whatever task you provide them.
But let's face it, there's absolutely a risk involved with hallucinations and inaccurate information. But I think what we're saying is that isn't a reason for a company to completely avoid using AI for the tasks that they have in their business. You need to, take a look at the benefits of the fact that it can work 1,000 times faster, but you need to double check the information. There's still a pretty big upside to it.
And that could be for any AI solution, right? An AI automation, a digital assistant, or a chatbot. You would never ever release this chatbot without at least a week or two of testing at minimum. And then even after you deploy it, you'd still want to ensure and test it and review it, because it isn't unlike, I think some people think it's like kind of like a typical like a tech tool or software where once you deploy it, I'm on to the next thing. So no. You have to be on this thing, because it isn't going to do the exact same thing over and over again. Even though how good you trained it, you still have to have an overview. The information still needs to be updated. So I think those are some of the mitigation strategies that if you have in place before you deploy, at the very least, there's going to be an understanding there. The next thing that we, from a risk perspective, is, I think this is kind of hypothetical, is like loss of control and loss of autonomous decision making. But I think, like, if you are setting up your system where you have no control and you've allowed your AI to be completely autonomous, which is the promise of AI agents to a varying degree, to me that doesn't make any sense, because in the end that means you're accountable for the outputs of whatever this AI agent or AI process provides.
But again, I bring that back to, I'll call it old school. If I get an employee or a consultant or somebody to do a report for me or come up with some kind of a plan for me, I would never just release it without reviewing it. And I think that people need to look at AI as a tool. So I think that there is that fear of that loss of control, but there really is no loss of control unless you let it, you get it to do something for you and you don't check it and send it out. Then absolutely. But that's no different than if you get a human to do the work for you and send it out without checking it. So I think the thing is that, again, I don't think there is any loss of control unless you allow it to take control. And I think that's what business executives need to be aware of.
And I think that's a good point when you talk about, like, well, if you give an AI this, wouldn't you do the same thing with a human? But maybe it's because for how many hundreds of years, we kind of, I don't know, you can predict what the human could, you can't predict what they can do, but the outcome is easily more controllable. Like, you can tell an employee, do it this way. If they don't do it this way, you just tell them, well, do it this way. Versus an AI is a little bit nebulous, a little bit different.
But how is it different? Because if I tell an AI to write something and I look at it and I go, that's not what I want, do it again. The difference is the AI will do it without complaining. Like, really, and it'll do it over and over again, and it'll learn and it'll get better so that the next time, whereas sometimes, I got to be honest, employees don't always learn. and they'll make the same mistakes over and over again. And maybe, maybe not everybody wants to hear that, but as I've run businesses for 30 years and I've seen it where, and trust me, I've used AI, and I think what it is that it's a false sense of security that people have because they believe that humans are more skilled at doing certain tasks because that's the way we've been trained to do, right? And I think that's where this is a real shift in thinking because this is something totally new for people.
I want to move on to the next risk, and I think this is obviously a bigger one, would be data privacy and security concerns, right? Because we've run into so many situations where what type of data do you have? First of all, is it clean data? Is it usable? And then does it involve personal information, or is the data already out there? I also think when we're talking about privacy and security, this is where an AI policy, governance, guidelines, providing for your staff, not you shall use this, you won't use this, you shall use this, we will not use AI, because we know people are using it already. You always have the story about the cops, and then the IT company that's like, the IT department's like, you're not supposed to, but like, well, you use it anyway.
But I think the security thing is also something, I mean, and we've done reports on this. I mean, absolutely, there's a security concern. But I don't know, again, if AI is much bigger of a risk of security than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. It's always been a concern, especially in the digital world. But even previously, I mean, people would steal documents. I mean, it's funny because people will go, oh, well, geez, I don't want to, put my financials online. I think people need to realize that, yes, you have to be aware of it and you have to put, processes and systems in place. But if I upload a financial report to, a chat GPT and I've set it not to train on my data, it's not like somebody can go, hey, send me Jeff's financials and they can pull down a document. It's not like a shared server. It's going to train on the information. I think that's what people need to kind of understand. So no, you don't want to be putting any private information up there, addresses or phone numbers or birth dates or anything. But then again, I would also take a look over your shoulder and take a look at what you've already posted on social media over the past 15 years, because that data is already out there. Or every time you've agreed to share your information with a company. So you're already breaching your security regardless, whether it's personal or corporate.
No, and I think that's kind of a fine balance too, because I think we've run into so many businesses that have the belief that the moment you put any type of information on any type of large language model, that your competitor can go out and search for it. It doesn't work that way. It isn't some sort of massive database that people can just pull one information over the other. I think you have to understand, do you want OpenAI, Anthropic doesn't train by default, Google, any of these models to have that type of information to train on? But you're right, Google has pretty much everything that you do. If you have a phone, like, it's all triangulated. You allow them, when you use the map feature, they know where you're. A lot of the stuff you've already provided in some form or another, right? So it's an interesting thing. But the last thing, like, for example, we are working with the municipality, and they're obviously held to a very higher level of scrutiny for any, for the residents. And I wouldn't be comfortable saying, oh, my municipality has dumped all the resident information into, I don't know, Microsoft Copilot or whatever that is. And I wouldn't want that. They're held to a higher standard. But at the same time, I know people are using whatever tools to try to get them to do their work faster. And it's inevitable that people have put some sort of private data, copy and pasted it into something just because of that.
But again, I take a look, and I try and bring this back to reality. If I take a look at your own personal security at your home, if you're really worried about security, put a 12-foot wall around your house. I mean, and guard dogs and cameras and guys with guns. I mean, if you're really but that's just the fact of when you're running a business. I mean, are you going to just, stay back in, archaic times and not use things like AI because you're so worried about security? Well, you're running the risk of a competitor taking maybe a slight more risk with the data and using these tools, and they're going to outpace you, and you're going to have a bigger problem on your hands if somebody else is going, you know what, we'll take a bit of a risk here, but we'll take calculated risks and we'll address the security concerns, cautiously, but still we're going to move ahead with it, as opposed to what we see with a lot of companies we talk to. They're just like, nope, we're not touching it. I
think that's
saw
why
a news story and it can train on my data, and it's going to China. I'm not going to touch it.
Well, I think that's where
Good luck.
the Microsoft Copilot narrative comes from, right? It's like, well, it could do all this, so buy Microsoft Copilot and you'll be safe.
Are you telling me no Microsoft servers have ever been hacked before? Like, come on. Like, your data is probably more secure loading it up into ChatGPT than it is putting it on your Microsoft server.
Well, I want to move on from there. Like the next risk is one that it depends on, to me, the business, right? And that's the bias and ethical implications, right? So it can inadvertently perpetuate a bias in their training data. The one thing I keep thinking about is like resume screening, application screening. I believe there's going to be a shift in how people hire, because right now people are creating their CVs and their cover letters with AI. And then companies are using AI to review said CVs and cover letters because they just can't do it. And even the current systems like the ATS systems that look for keywords, you may be missing a really good candidate because that person didn't put a specific keyword or phrase. So I think this whole industry is ripe for disruption, and I think AI is adding to that disruption. But I always go back to a study where they allow, like this company allowed an AI to, I think, review cover CVs from people with instructions on, hey, make sure that try to find candidates who won't turn over, because I think they had a problem with turnover. Well, it started finding candidates who were living closer, or I think outside a certain boundary of the company. But what they found was people who were either outside that boundary or inside, I can't remember what, inadvertently had people who were in lower income neighborhoods, which isn't really fair, because now it's just looking for people who are a specific social demographic, economic demographic, versus people who are really qualified in terms of merit. So there is that aspect to it too.
When you're talking about the bias and ethical implications, I mean, that's happened since the beginning of time. And it's unfortunate because, my belief is hire the best candidate regardless of who they are. But you're right. I think that AI can pick up on the negative human aspects and the way that humans have reacted in the past, so that, you start to take a look that it's going to start hiring old white guys for, executive positions, because that's what it sees in the past. And that's the concern you have, is that's not the way it should be done. So again, I think it's careful training. But even outside of that, I think the ethical implications as well is, I think that companies need to be aware, because a lot of the times we'll walk in and executives say, well, great, will this lower my head count? And others say, hey, I don't want this to lower my head count. And I think that is a corporate societal issue that we also need to be aware of with AI, is that, yes, it can probably remove some positions, but we also need to take a look at the bigger picture, that if we're taking away thousands and thousands of jobs, what do we do from a societal standpoint to keep people gainfully employed and make sure that, people have a chance to make an income and make a living, and not just be replaced by computers because the focus is on the bottom line of a corporate operation.
And one thing I always talk about too is, what's the point of having AI help do all this work if you just ended up doing more work yourself, right? The expectation is now, oh, because you have AI, you can do 10 times work, so now we want you to do 10 times as more, to be 10 times more productive. And there will be companies that kind of see it that way, but it kind of defeats the point of it, because it's supposed to help, not just make people more busy.
Well, and the funny thing is because there's the big talk of, when are you going to see the first $1 billion one-person run company? I keep thinking about that. And I think the fact, when you think about, again, ethical use of AI, you could have a $1 billion company, but if your customers don't have any money because they're not employed, who's going to have the $1 billion to spend on your products and services? So again, I think there's that. I think ethically as well, I think that obviously a bigger picture and outside of the corporate world is what happens when people start using AI for, bad reasons. When you start looking at using it for cyber attacks or for fraud, and other things. And again, this doesn't apply necessarily to good corporate operations, but it is something you need to be aware of, again, from an ethical standpoint.
And then the last thing that I want to talk about, and I think this has come up a couple times too, is the overdependence of using AI eventually, and then skill degradation. And I come back to the example we talked about with law enforcement for municipality, where we talked about what happens when, let's say, a junior accountant or junior lawyer they need to learn to become a mid-level or senior lawyer, right? So they need those experiences to fail. But usually what's given to those interns or new employees just starting out is usually kind of the grunt work, the repetitive, the mundane, the boring things that we talk about that AI should be. People just don't want to do them, but that's why they give them to the co-op student or the brand new employee just starting their career. So what happens when they don't have that? Where can they get the skills to become a senior lawyer, accountant, and so on?
But totally. And the other example with the Calgary Police Service was an example of, when they first were switching over to computers, and the computers were telling them where to go for calls. And some of the older guys would keep maps in their briefcases in the back seat so that when the computer system went down, they could still get to a call. And they found that some of the younger people were losing their critical thinking skills because they were so reliant on the technology that they didn't know or think to have a map in the back, so they're lost because they didn't have the computer telling them where to go. So there is a lot of concern with respect to kind of a skill degradation and how do you get the skills if the computers are doing all the work for that entry-level work?
I was in for the University of Calgary, we were talking to an engineering students, and one of the things that I think I brought up was, hey, you have got to, because a lot of AI can do a lot of the tasks that potentially you would be asked to do, you could look at it two ways. You could look at it as, oh crap, I'm not going to have as many opportunities. Or you can look at it as, how can I now leverage AI? If it's going to do all those easy tasks, how can I level myself up that I don't start at that base level? Because I also think if a company's smart, if AI can help me with all these repetitive, mundane tasks that I normally would have given a first-year engineer, first-year accountant, my expectation for that first-year accountant would be much higher. But what kind of strategic, higher-level tasks can I give them? How many times, my experience as a co-op student, looking back, you're like, man, that job entirely was useless. Like, I did really nothing except for copy paste. So I was not used for any of my thinking or any of my education. I think companies would probably need to go back and think, hey, how could we leverage this student or someone on a more strategic, more better level to take advantage of their skill set? But at the same time, I would expect those people, those new grads, that their skill sets leveled up because of AI.
100%. And I think that's a great example and a great way for people to think about any profession that they're going into is use the technology to level set at a higher level than traditionally thought to be. So I think that's a great point.
For our audience, so for businesses today, some of the things that you could think about is how can your business strike the right balance between leveraging AI and maintaining human oversight and improving skill set, right? Like, how can you improve people's careers, get them to level up? And then also, what ways can you identify or prioritize integrating AI into the decision-making process? Because I think a lot of businesses still think AI as create this, do this for me, but it's actually much more than that. How can I actually leverage it, train it so they can help you make those key business decisions. Learn more about implementing AI for your business by watching Learn more about implementing AI for your business by watching these videos here. Enjoy today's episode. Want to learn how AI can impact your business? Then please subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in our next episode.